Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, honoured guests, welcome to BCSC, the Berlin Climate Security Conference 2024. It is a privilege to welcome you all here today, those of us here in this room, in this beautiful room at the German Federal Foreign Office in Berlin, and also those joining from all around the world online via the live stream, gathered together and united by a shared commitment to one of the most pressing challenges of our time, securing a climate for peace. My name is Janani Vivekananda, and I am the Head of Programme for Climate Diplomacy and Security at adelphi, and it is my absolute honour, alongside my incredible colleagues at adelphi and at the German Federal Foreign Office, to be organising this conference. Today, about a month ahead of COP29, we are at a pivotal moment. We are the intersection of climate change, peace and security presents us with challenges, but also opportunities, a chance to rethink our approaches, to forge new pathways for dialogue, for cooperation, and importantly, for action to address the challenges ahead of us. We know a lot already, and we have made a lot of progress, even though it may not always feel like it. We know that sustainable solutions to peace require engaging affected communities, require amplifying the voices of those that are so often marginalized. But our structures, our systems, our capacities, our incentives often stand in the way. We know that we need to overcome sectoral silos, and we know that we need to balance long-term and short-term needs. We know this, but again, our structures, our incentives, our knowledge and our capacities often stand in the way. So whilst progress might feel frustratingly slow at times, and it might seem rather daunting, I hope that we're gathered here today and can be inspired by opportunities for transformation as well, by harnessing our collective wisdom and our experience and our creativity. I hope that we can explore how to turn some of these challenges, these climate challenges, into catalysts for peace, to find ways not just to build a future that is more secure, but one that is sustainable, one where our harmony with nature and harmony with each other go together to form the building blocks of our society. So as we embark on this journey today, the conference structure will take you through the conflict cycle, guided by a graphic, which I hope will come up shortly, which we affectionately call the Peace-Kagel, or the peace snail, or the Friedensschnecke, if you prefer. Starting from instability that climate change can exacerbate, where the entry points will be diplomacy or prevention or better conflict analysis, through the challenges of ending conflict and getting to peace through mediation and political settlements and peacemaking efforts, through to establishing stability and peace building, and ultimately the vital task of post-conflict reconstruction, rebuilding peaceful societies in the aftermath of war. Each stage presents us with unique challenges, but also remarkable opportunities for innovation, for collaboration, and building resilience. And each of today's 4 plenary sessions will unpack each one of these milestones, unpack the challenges, but also the opportunities. There's also going to be 2 lots of breakout sessions which offer deep dives into very pressing and pertinent thematic issues, from a just transition to migration with dignity in the face of climate stresses. Spaces for these sessions are highly limited, so if you haven't already registered via the app, I do urge you to do so. And on that, a few quick housekeeping points. Around the venue and also on your lanyards, you'll find QR codes where you can find the online program, which includes short descriptions of the sessions and also a profile of speakers. You'll also find the conference app on I think it's the left or the right bottom corner of your lanyard, where you can download the app, and this gives you access to information about the conference. There's the agenda, there's a map which shows you the rooms for the breakout sessions, where the bathrooms are, and you can also use the app to see the whole list of participants here in the room. You can connect to other participants and arrange meetings through the chat function in the app, and you can also, importantly, book your slot for some of the breakout sessions if there are still spaces available. So please do, and I do encourage you to download the app, just scan the QR code on your badge. For those joining online, there are Arabic and French subtitles available via the live stream. And for those of you here in the room, whilst the conference language is English, there will be one input, and a very important input, our keynote from Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, which will be in German. So please do grab a headset when you have the chance, so that if you're not a German speaker, you can understand in English. The German channel will only be needed and active from 10 until 10:20 for this keynote input, and then the rest of the conference will continue in English. All sessions taking place here in the plenary room in the Weltsaal will be live streamed, as well as some of the breakout sessions. If you're in a live stream session, this is open to the media. If your breakout session is taking place under the Chatham House rule, your moderator will let you know at the start of the session. Throughout the day, we do encourage all of you to share your insights and your takeaways using the hashtag BCSC 2024, and you can follow the conference at climate-diplo on X. After this first plenary, you'll be guided through the rest of the conference by our MC, Anna Maria Linke, so you don't need to listen to me much more. Now that's housekeeping over, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you for your commitment to this vital cause, and I really look forward to fruitful discussions and the insights that will emerge through our time together. And now, to get us going on this journey towards the climate for peace, I'm delighted to hand you over to Her Excellency Jennifer Morgan, State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action.
Thank you so much, Nina, and a big welcome also from me. Welcome here to Berlin, and also a huge thank you to those of you who have traveled from far away to be here together. I think, if we think back to the first BCSC just 5 years ago, we have to be honest that the challenges have grown. And I think making sure as we dig into how we're going to make changes and deal with these challenges, I think it's just important that we have the people and the homes and the places in our minds, in our hearts, in this room as we work together, because it's at this moment that it gives me great courage and even more hope that we're all here together trying and working to make that difference. Because we have seen how across all corners of the globe, climate change-related extreme weather events, well, they have increased, whether you see the heat waves, whether you see the floods and the wildfires, and how communities are suffering those impacts, their livelihoods, the food security implications, their lives, and of course, in the context of fragility and conflict, these risks are multiplying, and they're pushing thousands more towards extreme hunger, increasing institutional decay. And this can then fuel grievances. We know this. We're here. We work on this every single day. And so at this moment, I think when we're seeing the increase of these challenges, when we're seeing that just in 2023, there were over 20 million new internal displacements triggered by weather-related extreme events, then it is even much more important that we come together, because I think it is also this moment where we build on what we've learned. So our responses to these are also growing. And I think this complexity of bringing together these different communities, which is what I think makes BCSC so unique and so important, is evident. We see how we're working to integrate climate impacts both as a risk and an opportunity. We will discuss the examples of anticipatory humanitarian aid to green recovery later today. One example is how we've kickstarted solutions like the Women and Climate Security Initiative, where we kickstarted the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, which looks at how it and funds local women's civil society organizations, promoting those local solutions that we need. And there are many more in the room, I know, here. And I also think the community has grown. And I think as the understanding has grown of what these risks are, how they come together to increase conflict and this nexus, it's clear we have to join forces, have to join efforts to come together. And so it's very encouraging, I think, to see people working on adaptation coming together, people working on peace, people working on stabilization, people working in the security and intelligence sectors that really have and are working to bring these different pieces together. And I think this is true for the WPHF that I mentioned. It's also true for, we saw an encouraging COP28 declaration on climate relief, recovery, and peace, the Peace-Building Commission, and the Climate and Security Mechanism. And it also will be true at some point in time for the UNSC. We will stay on it. That I can promise you. So here today and moving forward, I'm really looking forward, though, to hear from the best practices, discussing the concrete solutions. We'll hear from the COP29 incoming presidency that's going to provide us a preview on their plans. And I think it's incredibly important, of course, to be listening to the experiences of those who are most affected. And we're very grateful, particularly to those governments that have made their way here with us here in Berlin, so that we can make sure that the solutions that are being developed are their solutions moving forward. So, and also big thanks to all the implementing agencies coming here today, the youth activists, the women leaders, all of you. So warm welcome. Thanks to Adelphi, of course, and to Janani and her team for bringing us together. And now I would love if we can move to our first panel. So thank you very much. We'll see you later on. And the first panel is really where we begin in that first stage there of the stage of conflict cycle of instability, to discuss how to prevent instability through climate security risk-informed planning. And for that, we have an excellent panel who I would love to ask to join me here on the stage. Dr. Ola Diehl, who is Vice President of the German Federal Intelligence Service. Welcome.
Morning.
Lovely to have you here. Ambassador Dr. Dino Patijala, wonderful to have you here, founder of the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, and amongst many other things. Wonderful to see you again, Ambassador. Great to have you here. And Aaron Sikorsky, Director of the Center for Climate Security and the International Military Council on Climate and Security. Wonderful to have you here. Have a seat. So we wanted to really start looking a bit more at how we think about this, how we analyze this. And only recently, and the first time I think you may all know, Dr. Diehl definitely knows, that Germany, we published our first and our own national security strategy. And in our strategy, there's three pillars. There's robustness, there's resilience, and there's sustainability. And climate risk plays obviously a key role in all of those three. And I think since we all are seeing and we're feeling the urgency of climate-enhanced security risks, what I'm keen is to hear your different perspectives on this and your expert opinions on each of your countries and each of the different positions that you're in. And if I start with you, Dr. Diehl, you've been a member of Germany's diplomatic service. You've seen very different foreign and security policy angles, from the state minister's office and embassies in New Zealand, Afghanistan, to the federal president's cabinet. And since 2016, you're vice president of the BND, which is Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service. So I guess my first question to open it up is, for some it may be surprising to see BND on this panel. So for others, absolutely not. But why should an intelligence agency be thinking about climate security? Why is the climate crisis relevant to German national security? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jennifer, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And actually, we are focusing on climate and security because we have to. And it goes without saying, Germany's Foreign Intelligence Agency, the BND, our task is to collect and to analyze information for the federal government on security and foreign policy issues. And it goes without saying that in foreign policy, climate is very high on the agenda for this ministry and for the federal government altogether. So The federal government wants the federal its federal intelligence service to come up with as much information as we can on climate and foreign policy, meaning you want us to, and we do our best to help you to find out what other countries think about climate and security, where the climate strategies of other countries lie. We are in the unique position that we can use instruments that you as the Foreign Office cannot use. I will not go, you will understand that, into details, but I'm not allowed to, but we have other accesses to gather information and to analyze this information. And if it comes to security, of course, this is the other topic, then for a long time already, our analysts and also our people collecting intelligence have known that there is a huge impact that climate change has on conflicts in the world, on migration, on all kinds of things, on poverty, on stability of countries, on energy security, on then even if you think indirectly, if some states at the moment think about revitalizing nuclear energy for fighting climate change, then this has aspects that this will affect also proliferation aspects. Proliferation is a big issue that we have to deal with at BND. So there's a huge number of reasons why we focus on this. We have done that for years. 2 years ago, we have reorganized our organization and we have come up with our own cell that does only climate and security questions, but this cell is more or less just coordinating what all our analysts and all our people collecting intelligence are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, so everything from kind of how you're organized, which is quite interesting, into how it's integrating in. How are you assessing in a way and prioritizing the climate security risks amongst other national security concerns? Because it must be a challenge there because there's many different issues that are going on right now.
That's the biggest problem for us at the moment, is not prioritizing, but is posterioritizing. We know that climate change is very high on the agenda, but I want to be quite honest, at times where we all look at the Middle East or at the war in Ukraine, this is higher on our agenda, I want to be honest here, even though it's a public meeting, than directly climate change. But climate change or climate and security is always there as a subject. We give briefings, we analyze, we collect information, we write our reports. COP is coming up. We will have a briefing with you, I think, to prepare you for this meeting and your team. So it's up there, but I want to be honest, at the moment it's Middle East and Ukraine very higher on the agenda.
I think that's one of the challenges of an issue that is so present in so many places, but at the same time in a world with so many crises, and that maybe could be something that you can all reflect on, how we keep this front and center in the midst of many other things that are going on. Maybe over, Aaron, to you. I mean, you've got a very interesting experience, I would say. You previously served on the U.S. National Intelligence Council, leading the climate and environment analysis across the U.S. intelligence community. And the National Intelligence Council put out a National Intelligence Estimate, or an NIE, which really, on climate risks, back in 2021. And the U.S. was a real front runner, and I think has really inspired others, including Germany, to consider climate change and security and in intelligence planning, but it couldn't have been easy. So it would be great to learn a bit about how actually the U.S. intelligence community has approached climate security analysis. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Secretary Morgan, and thanks to the Berlin Climate Security Conference for having me. And I should preface my remarks by saying I left government years ago, so I do not speak on behalf of the U.S. intelligence community, but perhaps that gives me a little more freedom in the position I'm in now to reflect on the NIE. And I think the NIE was so important in the U.S., not only because of what it said, but for who was saying it. Right, that having the U.S. intelligence community and NIEs are the top document from the IC. All 18 intelligence agencies have to coordinate on them. They're only done on the most serious issues facing the United States. So having that authoritative document that was made public, I think, has really helped advance the issue in the U.S. and on the international stage. But as you said, it wasn't easy. And I think there were a few reasons that it was so challenging, and we're seeing the US security community have to evolve to meet these challenges. I think one challenge is that the national security apparatus in the US isn't set up to deal with systemic risk, right? It was set up in the wake of the Cold War to deal with state threats, right? Threats from other countries and to protect national borders and national security. And so evolving to address what some call actorless threats, or what the director of the CIA has called problems without passports, is really challenging. Because the institutions are set up around countries. It's the country and regional offices that at the National Security Council, at the CIA, that have the power, right? And so bringing in something like climate is challenging. And I can't tell you the number of times I heard when I was still working in government skepticism from senior leaders, not that climate was an issue, but that it was an issue for the intelligence community to deal with, right? It's not our issue. And I think it gets back to this question you were asking about prioritization, because we're so used to racking and stacking, right? I'd get the question, well, is climate a more important challenge than China, right? And how does it fit? But I think it's the wrong way to frame the question, and the NIE does a nice job of this at looking at how does climate affect competition with China? How might it shape China's national interests on the world stage? How does it shape conflict, right? Even Gaza and Ukraine, you can bring in a climate and energy lens to those issues and see how they intersect. The last thing I'll say is I think the other challenge is we don't traditionally hire a national security workforce that has climate literacy or data literacy to be able to integrate these issues into their work. And so I think a key focus needs to be building a climate literate national security workforce so that things like the National Intelligence Estimate aren't just a one-off, right, that you do once in 2021, check the box, now we've done it, but instead it becomes part of the regular work that's done by all analysts, whether you're covering China or Russia or Sub-Saharan Africa, right, that you can bring in that climate perspective and better understand the risks and threats that it poses.
So in a way, it's really, I think that's quite challenging, but it's kind of the world today, right? We can't think in these silos. We have to be thinking across. As you said, you're now the director of the Center for Climate and Security and the International Military Council on Climate and Security. Maybe just a quick follow-up. I mean, when you were doing the work, because there may be others in the room who are looking at how to do this, were there specific turning points when you found, okay, whether it was through the NIE or other work, that security and defense community really made the connection to, okay, we need to also act on climate, and maybe differentiating between what they're doing in their own operations and also what's happening in the public discourse about climate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a couple different turning points. I think one turning point I've seen in the US national security conversation is the recognition and understanding that if you don't address climate change, it will make your job, whatever it is, in the national security community harder, right? You're gonna miss things or get things wrong. Because I think when you tell national security folks, look, you already have 10 things on your list that are really important. Now I'm adding an 11th. You have to think about climate change as well. Their initial reaction is, no, that's not important. But when you say, if you bring climate change in and these 10 other things that are on your list, you'll do them better, right? You'll be a better logistician if you're in the military, or you'll better understand a country's national interests and how it behaves on the world stage if you bring in that climate perspective. Then they're willing to integrate it. I think the second thing that has really gotten the attention in the US is just how intense and frequent climate extremes are and how much the military and security community is being called on to respond to them. Right? We at the Center for Climate and Security a few years ago launched something we call the Military Response to Climate Hazards Tracker. And every time around the world a military is deployed in response to the type of hazard driven by climate change, we track it. And as of September 1st, we were up to 417 deployments in 93 different countries around the globe. And in the US, just in the past, few weeks, you've seen thousands of troops deployed to Florida and North Carolina, right? Not just National Guard, but active duty military troops being deployed to respond. You've seen it here in Europe with the floods in Poland and Eastern Europe recently. The Polish Minister of Defense said it's their biggest military deployment in history, he thought, in response to those floods. And so when that's happening, that also catches the attention of leaders, and they recognize they have to better integrate and address these issues.
Very key issues also on the capacity, not only the knowledge, but also the actual people to be doing this. Dino, you're a career diplomat, you're a former ambassador. It's wonderful to see you again here. Former deputy foreign minister, accomplished academic, youth activist, foreign policy expert, and you're now heading up this think tank foreign policy community of Indonesia. So you've seen very many different perspectives, and as deputy foreign minister, you were at the heart, really, of Indonesian foreign policy. What can you tell us about now at a think tank or your different, if you interrogate this question through a geopolitical and also civil society lens as you're moving, what are some of the climate security risks that your region is facing and the different responses that you're thinking about as well?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me here,
Jennifer.
And my last recollection of Berlin was when I did the Berlin Marathon. I finished the line, and everybody was clapping on me, and I was wondering why. And you know why? Because I was literally the last guy out of, 20,000 people crossing.
I was going to say, because you were the first.
The Germans were so nice to clap for me. Right? My time was 8 hours, right? They took the stage out already.
But you made it and you stayed the course. This is a very important.
So, thank you. Thank you. And I guess that's the message for climate change.
Yeah.
Look, when I was in elementary school in Indonesia, my textbook and my teacher told me one significant thing about the world, which is the world changed 1945 after the atomic bomb. Right? Everything changed after that, militarily, the world order, and so on. Yeah. Climate change is this generation's atomic bomb, right? It is an existential threat, except that it's much more serious than the atomic bomb. And it is a threat that is comprehensive, that attacks the world and humanity in different forms, but every day, in different ways. And it will never stop. It will never stop. Yeah, it's going to keep doing that unless we find a way to reverse it. Right? So that's one point. Another point is we are trying to reframe this notion of this perspective on climate change. What I mean is this. The human race has always been fighting with one another. Nations against nations, groups against groups, religions against religions, and so on. But this is the first time in the history of humanity that every nation face a common enemy, right? Whether you're China, United States, or Russia, or Iran, you have this common enemy, whether you admit it or not, right? And I said, this enemy attacks you and all your citizens in different ways, but no one is spared. So I think having that perspective is important, and I hope it changes the way we look at the world, because we only have this window of a decade or so to have global emissions if we want to reach net zero by 2050. Right? So in terms of Southeast Asia, I mean, Indonesia is the largest archipelago in the world, and the IPCC has said that if we see a rise of global temperature by 2 degrees, then 99% of our coral reef will die, right? Globally, but including in Indonesia. And I cannot imagine what that means for a maritime country without reefs, yeah? And we've seen 60% of Indonesian population live in the coastal areas, which means in a scenario of sea level rise, that the damage will be incalculable, right? We see also throughout Southeast Asia, 58 million people have been displaced due to climate change, weather disruptions, and 325 million people are vulnerable to drought, including 60 million people in the Mekong area. Yeah. So the risk is just enormous, and I think what we need to do is factor in climate change in our security paradigm. And when I say security, I'm not just talking about the guns, the boats, and submarines. It's a definition of comprehensive security. Yeah, military, political, economic, and social. Just one example, we are moving Indonesia's capital to somewhere in the middle of Borneo, Kalimantan, and it's a big undertaking, and everyone is excited about Centennial Indonesia 2045. Yeah, Indonesia will be 100 years, and then my group pointed out to the government, look, no one has calculated that all these great projections about Indonesia will be useless in a 3 or 4 degree world, right? All the calculations are off, all bets are off, right? So I think the point is all countries, including Indonesia and Southeast Asia, we really need to seriously review our climate future and take part in the climate actions and factor in climate security in all development plans for the medium and long term.
And I'll come to you in a minute because I want to hear what your thoughts are in hearing this. And this is just one very important part of the world. I mean, how do you think, I mean, you mentioned the capital, but are there other local strategies that can then, I mean, how do you bring this kind of climate security, global peace together with enhancing the local resiliency? I mean, are there...
Interestingly, Jennifer, there's a lot of local solutions that needs to be scaled up. I just came back from West Sumatra. I'm on the board of World Resource Institute. Maybe you're a little bit familiar with that group. She was actually part of the WRI. But we visited a forest which is been transformed into social forest now. So the idea is we keep the forest, but there are people actually living in that forest. Mm-hmm. Right, living in that forest, and they are making more money keeping the forest intact, and they're getting some carbon credit. I think they get $5 million carbon credit, which is not much, but if you make $200 a month, right, that's a lot of money. And in fact, their income has risen, right? So there are a lot of local solutions based on local wisdoms that I think needs to be scaled up, and other communities in Asia, in Africa, even in the West, should learn from. I think it should be everybody learning from everybody. You'd be amazed of how many good stories out there. I mean, another one was there was a village of fish bombers in Banyuwangi, East Java, and that village was becoming impoverished. And they sent this one guy to find a way to resolve the problem. He went to university, and then he went back, and he found verses from the Quran, is an Islamic village, that he convinced everybody to turn away from being fish bombers to become eco warriors. Wow. So they changed the corals, they renovated the corals, and the fish came back, and the whole economy of that village now is based on eco-tourism. Wow. Amazing story. Yeah.
One person. Ola, you hear about Southeast Asia, and maybe to move a bit into the operable, kind of what we're doing, because we are in the midst of this, we have to be implementing. What are the types of strategies or analysis that then, from a B&D perspective or from a security perspective, you think, okay, now we need, or we are doing this, that, or the other thing in regards to the types of impacts that we're seeing in Southeast Asia? What's it make you think about when you go back home and ask that hub, that cell, what should we be doing?
Actually, you said that my background is that I'm a member of this house, that I'm a career diplomat, yes. But I love to have switched to the side of intelligence, because actually our job is not to come up with strategies how to deal with the problems. We leave that to you. We see ourselves in a supplementary or complementary role. We analyze the problems and then present our analysis to you, and then you have to come up with the solutions. Sorry for that, but it was too tempting. I loved what the ambassador said about climate change is a joint enemy that the entire world is facing. This is something that actually also changes the world of intelligence, because we are always, my job is also to travel around the world and to talk to other intelligence services around the world. And in the past, there was one joint enemy that we had before, at least this is my experience, that was Islamic terrorism. You could talk to all intelligence services around the world about this enemy. I'm trying more and more to talk about climate change and the role of intelligence services in this. I must tell you, we as BND are far behind our American colleagues who have a huge apparatus focusing on climate security through the lens of intelligence. We are much smaller, but we are, if we compare ourselves to other services around the world, we are, I would say, in the upper middle, because we at least have this cell. We have realized that this is an issue. We did start initiatives amongst the European intelligence services to discuss what we all can do, what our is it supplementary or complementary role can be, maybe both. And we are trying to shift the focus of the intelligence community more towards climate change and what it means to security issues. But I repeat myself, I mean, I'm very sorry to that. We don't have to come up with solutions how to tackle climate change.
Well, you're bringing in the analysis. We're working on the solutions, but it's...
Sorry, just
yeah,
one quick, I think when you said common enemy, it's not Islamic terrorism, but all kinds of terrorism.
Too. Yeah, not just Islamic, you're right.
That's
all kinds
sure.
of terrorism.
Yep, absolutely. And now, I mean, I think looking at being able to have a conversation about the climate threat, I mean, the way that you also put it, and the security risks around the world with the vocabulary that people can speak with each other about it, and that it's not, I mean, I remember my first Munich Security Conference years ago, where it was kind of seen as not a mainstream issue. I think that's definitely shifting. Aaron, I mean, what if you were, looking back at your experience and now seeing what's happening, where would you, I mean, I thought your example on the military forces, that's something that I've heard often also in the context of NATO allies who are very, having massive impacts at home, and then you look at developing countries that have even less capacity. But where would you be? Where would your prioritization be right now? I mean, or what are you recommending in your role?
Sure. A couple of things I would say, listening to the ambassador and the director here in terms of how I think the security community should be prioritizing. One is, I think we need to be looking at places that are currently stable and thinking about how climate change over the next 5 to 10 years will undermine stability. I think it's understandably so. Much of the climate security conversation has focused on places that are already incredibly vulnerable to climate hazards and already in crisis, and we need to look there, but we also need to check our assumptions about climate going forward in places that we think are doing okay, and how we can get ahead of those risks. I actually think one of my favorite intelligence techniques was a key assumptions check when I was an analyst, where you go back to a line of analysis you've had for many years or months that hasn't changed, and you say, what are my unstated assumptions underpinning this analysis? And if those assumptions changed, how would my analysis change? I think climate change is a huge challenge to our underlying assumptions, right? You were talking about this with the different degrees of warming. And so I think there's a range of ways we should be investigating. Another thing, I take your point that the intelligence community doesn't do policy, but one thing we do in the US is opportunity analysis, right? We tell governments, if you did this, this is what might happen. And I think around the climate adaptation interventions you were talking about in Indonesia, I think there's a real need to understand all the opportunities for security, for promoting security, promoting peace, that investments in climate adaptation can bring. And I think that's a place where the United States and other big donor countries have really underperformed, frankly. And making the security case for those investments is really important, and something that I think intelligence communities and security actors can do to help show governments the benefits.
Dina, your thoughts on? on that? And I mean, I think it's very interesting, and I'm curious on both the resilience and on the, I think oftentimes it's not, these connections that you're making are not understood in the public domain. So it's kind of almost seen as adaptation, or as, you know, it's not understood as, of course it's what's needed on the ground, but it is also having either adaptation and resilience funding going up. You know, we are all supposed to be having half of our funding going to adaptation, but then also thinking about it from your own country's perspective and your own security perspective. Within Southeast Asia, I mean, where do you see, if you could say to various partners sitting here in Berlin, where we should be prioritizing our resources? What would you be? What do you think?
Yeah, okay. Well, first, the situation in Southeast Asia geopolitically is different than Middle East and Europe, because now you have a twin threat. One is the conventional threats, the war at your border, right, and the non-traditional threat. In the Middle East also, there's war raging in the Middle East, possibility of expanding, plus the non-traditional threats. In Southeast Asia, fortunately, we now have the luxury that is mostly the non-traditional threats, right? Meaning, look, we have issue in the South China Sea, but China is not going to invade Indonesia, right? It's not going to invade the Philippines and so on. And you know, the worst skirmishes in the South China Sea is the Chinese hosing Philippine boats, and you know, that's an indication of how, you know, things are, there are disputes, but manageable, right? So I think for us, the challenge is for the security sectors, how they embrace the climate factor. I'm saying in this way, there's no scenario mapping and contingency planning with regard to climate disasters, right? And we're heading in that direction. Indonesia just signed a defense agreement with Australia that includes humanitarian relief and disasters, natural disasters, but it's not the rule of the game in Southeast Asia at the moment. And another point that we'd like to see is this. Look, we were disappointed to see how the U.S. and China, for example, couldn't get their act together during COVID-19, right? I mean, we didn't care who gets the credit. We didn't care who's doing this. Let's just work together, right? So the COVID-19 was for us an eye-opening that, look, these guys, they're still competing when lives were at stake and so on and so on. And now we're saying to them, look, you guys are competing elsewhere in the globe. Can you compete? Can you work together, at least on climate change in Southeast Asia, right? In Southeast Asia, and there's still that competition. I mean, just one example: in Indonesia, we received the JETP aid, and we are very grateful. $20 billion, right, in the package, private and public money. But the Chinese say, "Hey, how do we help you with this, right? Because it's seen as only the G7 aid, right? And they don't want Chinese money coming in. So the Chinese are coming in a different way, right? Which is fine, but we'd really like to see, look, can we just go one level up? And then if we recognize that this is a common enemy for all, can we set rivalries aside and try to find a way of working together between parties that are in rivalries? That's what I like to see in Southeast Asia, you know, and hopefully it's not a utopia. Yeah.
Well, I think having that kind of, as you were saying, there's this common goal that we need to be working towards, and then having unusual and needed collaboration across what might be. And I think in some ways in the climate negotiations, up to this point in time, and I hope also in Baku, we will manage to come together around collective goals, but we also need to be doing that in our interactions amongst different countries as well. And I wanted to also just bring briefly in the question of energy security, because this also is obviously a big piece of the security threats. And what I observe is, on the one hand, you have, places, in Indonesia, but across Southeast Asia, Africa, Asia, et cetera, North America, with tremendous resources in the solution side of things. So the opportunity of what can come from the price of solar driving down, the ability for energy access, but also the export opportunities, also critical minerals. But then at the same time, the geopolitics shifting for fossil fuel producing countries that need to be looking at how they are going to be diversifying their economies. And a security community, if I may, that's observing that, but to this point in time, I think has maybe felt hesitant about engaging in the fact that what is the decision that we all took last year around transitioning away from fossil fuels and scaling up renewables and efficiency is more in the policy area of climate and energy people, but not in the security piece. And so what does that, if you're looking into the future, Erin, maybe to start with you, if you're looking into the future on this, I like to say the geopolitics of energy, it's shifting beneath our feet. What do we need to be paying attention to? Can the security community play a role in helping countries or informing how countries are going to meet those commitments we made last year?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think there are a couple things that the security community needs to pay attention to. One you already mentioned, this idea of new winners and losers, right? And understanding the potential for that, and then what are the ways in which we can guard against security fallout, right, from that, because those that are going to become losers, right, have an interest in making that not happen. And I think, frankly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the energy crisis after that gave us a preview of some of those types of challenges and how countries need to address them. I think the other piece of that is, as you said, new opportunities around minerals and extraction and exports, and there are a host of security challenges related to that as well. Look at Kashmir, for example, and the lithium deposits that India has found there. We did some research last year looking at the security challenges around that type of deposit. Those are the types of things that the intelligence community, I think, is really well positioned to analyze and understand and inform policymakers so we can make smart decisions going forward there. I think it's a great place for scenarios analysis, right, and gaming out some of these futures to better understand the risks. So I think, again, so we can make smart decisions as we move through this transition and make it as, minimize the disruptions going forward.
Can I just also?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Dino, and then I'll come.
I just want to add something. We talk about the global south these days, right? And we talk about us living in a multipolar world. Just want to point out what multipolarity mean to countries like Indonesia and the global south. It means one, multi-alignments, right? Even though you have alliances, you can have different alignments. Second, multi-options, right? So if one time United States was the only option, then this time China could be, and vice versa, and so on. And third, multiple resources, which means if we don't get resources from one, we get the others, who we are aligned to, right? So I think this version of multipolarity is really reshaped the way the global south countries like Indonesia look at the world, including on climate offers, right? The largest investor in Indonesia on floating solar panel, and the largest in Southeast Asia, is from the Emiratis, right? In the past, we didn't think of them. But now, as I said, multi-alignments, multi-options, and multi-resources. And I think the West has to compete in that kind of world. You have to re-compete and re-earn your place in this multipolar world, the new multipolar world that I just described.
Yeah.
Energy security is indeed shifting geopolitics dramatically, and as you said, Ambassador, the countries at the Gulf, for instance, most of them have understood and they are reshaping their policy. Russia has not. For us, Russia is very high on the agenda, as I said before, given the war of aggression against Ukraine, but also given the military buildup of Russia. We believe that Russia is sort of preparing for a confrontation with what we call the collective West. And Russia is building its military buildup entirely on oil and gas. And Russia has not understood that this is not the future. And when we are tasked by our government to assess how powerful Russia will be in the future, we also have to look into that, and we have to see how is Russia really looking for alternative strategies to finance itself? No, it's not at the moment. On the other hand, if we look into, I don't want to come up with years, but let's say a decade or whatever, I think for about a decade, Russia is safe. It's building its military, its entire economy and its military build-up on oil and gas, because there will still be a need for oil and gas. And notwithstanding all the sanctions, Russia is finding good ways to sell its oil and gas and to continue to work on that. So this is something that we really have to keep in mind. Russia also will have to understand, but we are not giving advice to the Russian government, but we are analyzing for our government, the world politics for our government.
Well, indeed. I mean, I think these shifting geopolitics, the multipolar, the multi-alignment, I find absolutely, thank you for bringing the point up, because I think sitting here in Berlin, sitting here in Europe, I mean, our climate foreign policy, our foreign policy is very much looking at how we are working actively with partners to help to both in a way of self-interest, but also in a multipolarity way of looking at what are the interests of the partner. And how do we, and I'm curious from Southeast Asia, you know, where you see the greatest opportunity for that partnership, knowing that you have many options, right? Is it in the critical raw materials? Is it in the green hydrogen? Is it in resilience building? Is it a bit of everything in a way? I mean, where do you think, because Southeast Asia is a very big priority for Berlin, for us, and seeing how Asia and Southeast Asia evolves on that, where do you think, where should we be focusing, and be honest?
Definitely energy.
Yeah. And how should we be doing it?
Oh, okay. I think
he's honest, and we need clarity in here. Yeah.
First, energy. The partnership that you have now, that we have, I think is good. Okay. We just need to intensify it. Forestry, the carbon sinks. Yeah, yep. Indonesia has done great. We reduced deforestation by 85% in the last 2 years. I think one of the fastest in the world. We're planting mangroves. As you know, mangroves absorbs emission unlike any other trees in the world. I think we have plans to 750,000 hectares of mangrove plantations. Yeah. So again, there's a lot of plans. EV would be also a big area. But my greatest concern, Jennifer, is this. Not just for Indonesia or Southeast Asia, but for the rest of the world. We're just seeing too many incrementalism. You know, like my hotel key now is wooden. Okay, nice, you know. But I travel around Berlin, I see some electric cars, but not many, including in my hometown, Jakarta as well, you know. But there are just a lot of things that we're doing more and more, but it's just not enough to get us to the 1.5 degree world. Mm-hmm. And I think what we need is a transformational change, but we just don't have the politics, we don't have the geopolitics, we don't have the economics around the world to deliver that. And I think we are really losing so far this race against time. We're not winning it yet, right? And I think that's what worries me most, that we're all too focused on doing incremental things rather than serious transformational systemic change that will deliver us the 1.5 degree world.
I think that's an excellent way to wrap us up in a way. I mean, I agree with you. I think I like to say if we had more time, we're starting in a way. I mean, if you look at 85% of power plants are renewable, if you look at the prices of solar, if you look at where EV markets are going, and et cetera. However, the realities of people on the ground is the here and now, and therefore focusing on transformational change, focusing on those conversations in the security community to inform them, the strategies that are there, the projections, I mean, that are there, the scenarios. I mean, I've taken much with me, and I'm sure that all of our audience has here as well. So thank you very much to all three of you, and I want to hand us back to Anna Marie, our moderator here, so we'll take our seats.